Hello YouTubers. This is a new video where I get to walk you through step by step through the idea of provisioning Azure instances in the cloud with C# code without having to deal with ARM templates or YAML code or any of that stuff. I'm going to walk you through the entire process for developing enterprise-ready pipelines to allow running C# code in your ADO, Azure Pipelines, to actually provision Azure instances in a very, very secure way without having to learn any additional technologies. So let's just start from the top here. Here's a blackboard here, and let's talk about what we're really trying to do here. Assume that you have a C# file, just a very simple C# file, and this file has some code in it, and you want this code to go and say, I want to be able to provision an entire environment in the cloud, right? This is your non-fabric kind of, Kubernetes environment where you get to describe, you have a description of what your environment is going to look like. This is just a simple application that you're building, maybe a microservice that has an app service and a database and maybe some stuff around that, maybe app insights and maybe, a queue here or there. I want to write some C# code so I can create these instances in the cloud without having to learn about ARM templates. I want it to be simple. I want it to be easy. I want it to be targeting the engineering experience as a first-class citizen. How do I go about doing something like that? Well, for starters, let's just go ahead and create a simple console application together. Let's just start from scratch. Let's build a little simple console application. So I'm going to go ahead and create new console application. Here we go. And let's just call our console Magic Azure AZX. And it's .NET 5. Let's just go ahead and create with .NET 5. Here we go. And here we go. So a simple console hello world app. And we're going to turn this very simple application into something that creates an entire environment for us, all in C#. Pure C#. You don't have to learn anything else. Well, first of all, we need to install some libraries. We need a little bit of libraries. We need the SDKs, something that can turn the APIs that allow us to communicate with Azure into something that we can work with. So here's my Fluent API, has 5 million downloads. Not super popular, but maybe after this video, people will start looking into this and make it popular. So, okay, so we have Azure Management Fluent. I'm going to go ahead and install that. And then I'm going to show you how powerful this is. It's a Fluent API. Fluent API is meaning Fluent API is an API or an SDK that doesn't require too much reading or documentation. It basically lends itself out for you to be able to work with. I'm going to show you that in a second. Let's just say you have an iAzure in here, which is basically a very easy, simple client that allows you to do everything. And I'm going to assign it to null for now, just for a second. Look what you can do with this client. I can go ahead in here and say, from app services, I want to create a web app. See? And I want to call that web app my app XYZ, like this, excuse me. And then I want to say this is with a region. And this is a region from, let's say, West US. West or US West. US West like this. US West 2. Right? And you can go and say with existing resource group or with new resource group. See how it's so fluent. It allows you to create an app service. You don't even have to read a documentation about it, right? So in here, basically, it says with existing resource group. Okay, let's go ahead and create a resource group. So here's my resource group like this, and I can go ahead in here again from that Azure guy. I can go and say resource groups define. Look, my resource group like this, and I can go and say with region US West 2, and then create. So just like that, I created a resource group. And I can take that resource group and throw it right here. Boom. Now I have a resource group. Now what? What else does this guy have? This guy wants, you know, with a new Windows plan, it wants a plan, right? Can we use an existing plan? Let's see. With existing resource group, with Windows plan. I can create a Windows plan, and here's the pricing tier for this guy. Look how easy this is. And I want the pricing tier to be, see in here, let me hide away the camera. In here in the pricing tier you can go and say basic B1, basic B2, all the pricing tiers that you can think of. Normally I just go with standard S1. And then you can define authentication, you can define source control, where the information is coming from, you can define everything. You can really define everything, right? So in here I can say, let's see, create. So this basically will create an app service for me, right? But what if I have an existing plan? I don't want to create it this way. You know, I think you should be able to go and say var plan equal Azure dot app service dot plans, app service plans dot define my plan like this dot with the region. Here's your region, US West 2. And then here's my existing resource group. Of course, I want to use my existing resource group. And then with pricing tier, so here's my pricing tier dot standard 1. And then with operating system, and I get to pick up the operating system, and I go with Windows. And then at the very end, I'm going to create. So this is me creating the plan. So in here, I created a plan. And then I want to use that plan in here, right? So I can go ahead in here and say, instead of with new Windows plan, I want to use an existing plan with existing plan. Why it's not letting me do that part? Give me a second there. Let's see. I think that comes before with, yeah, with existing Windows plan right there. So with existing Windows plan, so I don't need to define a region because the plan defines the region. And I only have to define the resource, the Azure resource group, right? So this is all good and dandy, right? So you see the power of this. You can create a plan, you can create a resource group, you can create all of this. Great. But how do I initiate this guy? This is where things get a little interesting, right? In order for you to be able to access any Azure subscription, right, you need to create what we call a service principal. Think of a service principal as the guy that represents you, your automated process in your Azure subscription on your Azure platform. And that guy, you send it commands, you send it API calls, and you tell it, hey, create a resource group, create an app service, create a database, and it will take these commands and it will go and provision whatever you're asking it to do. All right, so how do we go about creating something like that? Let's start from scratch, from very top, you know, nothing before that, nothing after that. Let's go ahead in here. And here's what we need to do. We're going to go and create an app registration. So I'm going to go ahead in here and say magic. What did I call my app? I have too many. Magic Azure AZSK. AZX. Okay. Magic Azure AZX. Okay, that's my app. I'm going to just create and register that app first. And in that app, you'll see a bunch of information in here, right? I have an application client ID. Let's copy that guy. Let's go back here and put that guy in here. I'm going to create a little method. I'm going to call it create Azure. And I'm going to just copy that information. So my client ID is this guy. What else do I need? I need a tenant ID from here. Let's go ahead and get the tenant ID, which is the directory ID. Here's my directory ID or tenant ID, right? And the one thing that's really important above all of this is the secret. So let's go ahead and create a secret, right? So there's a new secret, my super secret add, and it's gonna give me this weird looking value, and I'm gonna put it in here. Don't worry about this. I delete all of that stuff right after the demo, so we should be fine. So that's the secret, right? Now I want to go ahead and create that guy. How do I go about creating that Azure guy? Here's what we need to do. I'm going to go ahead in here and say this is Azure credentials. Credentials like this. So this is credentials, and then out of these credentials I'm going to call SDK context. I don't know that off the top of my head. I'm just creating it. I'm reading it from another place because it's not something that you would remember. And then from service principal, and inside that guy it's going to ask you for these things. So I need a client ID, I need a client secret, and I need a tenant ID like this. Okay, I need those three things. I already have those three things. There's also a fourth thing that I need, which is the Azure environment, which is in our case here we will just go see the China, German, US government, known environments. We're going to go with global cloud, right? Because that's where we're at. Now let's just copy that data in there. So here's my client ID, here's my tenant ID, and here's my secret. Now what? Now I have these credentials. Let's go ahead and return azure.configure. So this is my credentials. And then with log level, and I'm going to go ahead in here and say, let it be basic and authenticate. And this is the piece that I care about. This is the credentials. And then with default subscription. Your default subscription, if you have multiple subscriptions, that's a different story. But in our case here, we're using the default subscription, which is the main subscription that you have. If you don't like this guy, you can always go ahead and say with particular subscription, but then you're going to have to tell us what subscription you want to pass in there. In our case here, it'll be the default subscription because it's the only subscription. Okay, I don't need these comments anymore. Comments are bad. Don't have comments in your code. Unless it's code that no one can read, then go ahead and document it. Now I have this Azure guy. I can go ahead in here and say create Azure like this. And I can create all of these little resources, right? For the time of this video, I'm just going to comment those for now. I'm going to show you the whole thing end to end. I'm just going to let it create this for me. I'm going to go and give it a different name like Magic Azure Resources. Okay, so C# code, creating Azure. I got the principal, create and run. Let's go ahead and run this guy. And let's at the end here, let's have it say done. Just so we know that we're actually done. Let's go ahead and run this guy. So just going back to my Azure cloud here. Obviously this is gonna fail, and I'm gonna tell you why in a second. But this is all the resource groups that I have in this particular subscription. There isn't much going on here. If I refresh like this, there's nothing going on. If I run this, this is gonna fail at once. Why? Because I didn't give this app. Just because you created an app and you have a secret, it doesn't mean that this app has all the powers it needs. Right? It doesn't have all the powers it needs to actually do something. So this guy's going to go ahead and say the client ID is null or something to that effect. There it is. So it's basically saying in here, the client subscription ID cannot be null because it doesn't have access to that. We didn't give it access. Let's go ahead just for the purpose of this demo. I'm going to go into subscriptions like this. Here's my Azure subscription. And I'm going to go into access control, and then I'm going to add a role assignment. And let's find the app that we just created. Now bear with me because this is very interesting. We called it Azure, we call it Magic Azure something. Here's our app right there. So I went into Azure subscriptions, access control, check access add, and then I went to Magic Azure. And I'm gonna make this guy an owner just for now, right? You can find the right role for it just for the purpose of this demo. Let's make it an owner for now. So now this guy is an owner, can actually take away and create anything it wants, right? Now that I gave it that power, let's go ahead and see what happens. So these are my resource groups again, and I'm about to create a resource group that is called Magic Azure Resources. right? Let's go ahead and run this sucker here. Here we go, and it says it's done. Is it really done? Let's find out. If I go back here, it should show Magic Azure in a second. Just give it 1 second. Sometimes it takes a minute. If I refresh this whole page, there it is, Magic Azure Resources. Do you see it? It's right here. So what does that mean? It means that with a little console application, you can create a resource group, you can create an app service, you can create a database. Every single product that you can think of that exists in Azure today as a cloud service provider, you can create simply from a simple little console application that you have running on your machine if you give it the right credentials. But that alone is not enough. That alone is fun and games, great, you can do these things, but if you're in a big enterprise, you have 20, 30, 40 team members, engineers, and all of them are trying to push code to be able to create instances, and they're building, ginormous end-to-end microservices architecture, you're gonna need to standardize things a little bit, right? You're gonna need to create the code that doesn't have secrets in it. It doesn't expose any secret, doesn't expose anything about your business, but at the same time, it can be deployed into your Azure pipelines, so you can actually execute on an agent and actually create an instance for you. Let's start simple. I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you. I don't want to confuse you. Let's just make it really, really simple. Let's go back to our Blackboard here. We did this piece. We built a C# code that executes in Azure, right? But we can't just every time we want to create an instance, we go to our machines and just run the script. Why is that? Because if you're in a 20 member, 20 engineers team, you can't just change the Azure resources without having it being reviewed and approved by the team members, right? Maybe your code has mistake in it. Maybe you're taking down an entire resource group. As you can through this code, you can actually start and stop an app service, and you can delete a resource group, like we're going to talk about, the build and destruction for resources. You can't just run it from your machine. You shouldn't be allowed to do something like that directly from your machine. What should happen is that your nice little code here should go through code review. So that's source control. Let's say get. It should go through get like this, and then from get it should deploy into Azure. It should be accessible. See how the picture is getting bigger? It should be accessible to ADO, Azure DevOps. So the code goes right there. And then Azure DevOps will kick off the process of running that script to run into the cloud. But Azure DevOps doesn't know about your secrets, because your code doesn't have this principal ID and tenant ID and all that crazy stuff that we just talked about. We will get to that one in a second, but for now, I'm just going to tell you that there's this amazing way you could have Azure DevOps talk to Key Vault, which is a very specific way of storing your secrets. So you can pull these secrets in and actually run it without having any issues, storing your secrets or any of that stuff. So no one knows the secrets, right? Only ADO has access to Key Vault, and the admin who set up all of these things is the one that knows about that. But at the same time, team members can push code and control instances in the cloud without having to know these secrets and without having to monkey around with your Azure portal. So let's just start small. I want to create this guy. So we got this guy already done. We want to create this guy here, this guy in progress. So this guy in progress and this guy in progress. And this is not started yet. We want to push this code into a project in ADO or Git, and then we want to have this run a very simple console app, not even something that creates an instance or anything. How do I just run a console app in general in ADO that doesn't do anything other than saying hello world or done whatever? Let's go ahead into our browser here, and let's create a new project. I'm going to call it Magic Azure AZS X. I think I call it AZX. Magic Azure AZX. Okay, let's create the project Magic Azure AZX. Just a simple project like this. There we go. Okay. And then it has a repo, of course. So let's copy that repo. Let's open up the command line. Here's my command line. And let's just clone that guy in. You can also clone directly through Microsoft Visual Studio if you want. I am a little bit of an old school. I do it my way. So this is Explorer here. So this is how I cloned this code. Let's copy the code that we had in here, this Magic Azure code. Let's copy that guy and throw it right in there. So I'm going to copy this whole thing. Open folder and File Explorer. Here it is. Right? And then I'm going to go back to my repo here, and I'm going to open my code from there. Let's kill that guy. Let's run it from here. There we go. So this is just me. I just want to run something that says hello world. So that means everything I have in here I'm going to hide. I'm going to hide this guy. You can't push secrets in your code. That would be a big no-no, because that puts you and your organization in danger. So please don't do that. Let's just run a simple console application in Azure DevOps. So this is console write line put done in there, and then I'm just going to push that code. Obviously there's a lot of junk in there that we don't need, so let's just ignore. Let's ignore all of that stuff. We don't need any of that stuff. Yeah, all I need really is the get ignore, the program CS, which has done, and we have the Azure, and let's push in this. I'm just going to say init project. I'm just initializing my project, and let's push that upstream. There we go. Why does it still have init? Let's try this again. Commit all and push. Here we go. I didn't stage them or something. There you go. This guy should... Okay, here we go. So I pushed that out. So now I have this code out there in my repository. So I have this code right here. Now let's build a pipeline task. And this task, all it's going to do is going to run this little console app for me. That's all it's going to do. And then we're going to add on top of it, and I'm going to show you the magic that you can do, you know, to build a proper pipeline that can take care of your instances and all that kind of stuff. So let's just go ahead to pipelines in here. Let's create a new pipeline. And see, there's the YAML stuff that I really don't like, so I go with classic. There will be another video where I'm going to show you how do you write the build steps in C#, so you don't have to do YAML ever again, all in C#, but that's a different video. So let's go ahead and build that pipeline. In the pipeline, I'm going to take advantage of the existing ASP.NET Core, even though I'm not building ASP.NET. I'm just going to get rid of the test piece. This piece I don't need. And I don't need this piece. Remove all of this. I just want the restore and build. And I'm going to add one more task on top of it. It's called command line, which is this guy. That's my command line here. And in my command line, I want to be able to run my stuff, right? So I want to be able to go and say, run this Magic Azure AZX. So how do I do that? It's a very simple script. You can say Magic Azure AZX.exe. So that's the execution. But before you forget, you want to make sure that you find the right directory. Sometimes it won't give you that kind of directory, right? You're going to have to write it by hand. So it's something to the effect of, if I'm not wrong, something like bin release net 5.0. We'll see in the build, but it should kick that off accordingly. So let's just go ahead and queue this guy, and let's see if we can build this console app like that. Here we go. This is really fun. You know, you can run any console application in ADO, and it can do anything you want. It gets a little bit more interesting when you're accessing secrets and variables that are in your pipeline, and the secrets are not really in your pipeline. I'll show you that in a second. Here we go. It's building. Let's hide this guy. Ah, it failed. Let's see why it failed. So it basically said command not found. Command not found. Command not found. Let's see why it said. Did I forget the little let's see, edit pipeline. Let's put this on Windows first. So this is Magic Azure AZSK-EXE. I think that's right. One more thing. Let's look if it's actually building things. See, the build will tell you if it's putting things in the right place. Let's find out. So then here, if you go into build, it'll tell you this is where I put things. This is your pipeline right here. Magic Azure bin. Oh, I probably put the I always forget the it usually goes in the opposite direction. So let me just fix that. Let's put that in. Here we go. Build. Okay, this is all good. Good. Command line. Okay, let's just double check this guy. Yeah, this guy's perfect. And the command execution is perfect. I just need to be running on Windows then, that's all. I bet that's what it is. Let's go ahead in here. Pipeline, Windows. Let's go here. And let's try this again. There might be a way to do it in Linux as well. I don't know what the command is to execute. Obviously, I don't think Linux will have an exe. I think you're going to have to run it as something else, unless you have Wine installed or something. But let's just see if this one executes. All we want is that this guy to first just run in the pipeline, and then I'm going to show you a couple of crazy things that you can do, and then finally be able to kick off that pipeline, and it will actually provision a resource group in the cloud. While I'm at it, let me delete this resource group that we just created so we can play around with it again. Let's take that guy here. Delete. Yep, let's let it delete, and then this guy here will be basically kicking off that build. Let's leave this guy. Still running Linux, maybe. We'll see. Yeah, no, it's running an image from Windows, so we should be fine. Here we go. Command line script, boom, executed. Did it print? Done. Here's done. So that's it. I just ran a simple console application in Azure Pipeline. Now think about the possibilities. Think about what we can do here. We can access all environment variables. We can do anything we want, right? But the trick here is that I want to be able to run this exact same script that I had originally, this guy here, with this guy, without having to submit my variables in here. How do I go about doing that? This is the trick, right? First of all, and pay attention with me on this one, because this is where all the good stuff happens. There's a little piece here on the side called library, right? This library allows you to create variable group. We need to attach this variable group to something called key vault. If you go back to the dashboard here, so we did this and we did this. This is both successful, right? So we created both of these. Now I want to talk to this key vault guy. This key vault guy will have the secrets, so I don't have to push them in my code. The trick here is to put these secrets in there and then allow your Azure pipeline to be able to access these secrets without actually storing it and saving it locally. This is the trick. This is how you do this properly as an engineer, so you don't have to expose secrets out there. How do we go about doing that? Let's just go ahead and create a key vault. Here's resource groups, secret group. I'm going to go ahead and create a new key vault. Here's a key vault. This is where you save your stuff. And let's call our key vault Magic Azure Secrets. Like this. Standard, sure. create, just a little thing that hides your secrets and all that kind of stuff. And it has all the magic encryptions and everything else. Takes it literally a second because it's basically a storage, right? So here it is. A storage with a little bit of fun stuff on top. Let's give it a second. Let's go, let's go. So this is us running in here. So while we're at it, let's just go ahead in here, group name. How do we need to connect that group to a key vault, right? How do we go about connecting this to a key vault? I'm going to show you that in a second. Let's just variable group, security. This is all good. Just wait for it. Allow access. See, you can allow access to all pipelines. And you can control particular link secrets in Azure Key Vault as variables. This is where things get interesting, right? This here, I'm going to call this Magic Azure Secrets, like this. And then I'm going to go find my subscription, which is my subscription. I need to authorize. So now I'm authorized to access that subscription. Say I'm authorizing my pipeline. This is doing some crazy magic behind this, creating a service principal and then connecting it to the subscription. It's crazy. So that's this guy. I really appreciate the work that people put into things like these. But then let's go and see if we can find. Let me refresh this guy. This guy is going crazy. Let's give it a second there. Link secrets. Here's my subscription. And then let's see. See, if now that I refresh this guy, I see both key vaults that I have. We did Magic Azure Secrets, right? Let's authorize. We're giving it the access, and now it can see my variables. I don't have any variables yet, but I'm going to do that in a second. So here's my variables in the key vault. I'm going to go into the secrets like this, and then I'm going to start creating some secrets. So what are the secrets that I want to keep in there? I want a couple of them. So I want client ID, client secret, and tenant ID. Okay, client ID. So what's the client ID is? I want this value here. So that's client ID. Create. Let's create another one. Client secret. Let's put the secret in there. Here's this guy. Create. The last one I want to create here is the tenant ID. I mean, the client ID and the tenant ID, to be honest, is not really a secret, but let's just keep them all in one place. Tenant ID, it's the secret that's really a secret, but here we are. Okay, so I created those. If I go back to this library and just refresh things a little bit, let's see here. See, as soon as I clicked add, now it sees all these 3 secrets that I have. So I want all of them to be there. So here's my secrets, right? And now all I have to do is save. So now I'm saving this. Why did I call it no variable group? Let's call it Magic Azure Secrets. So that's the library. That's that library piece in here. It's far, far away from your Azure pipeline. And now if I go back to my pipeline, I can modify that pipeline. I can edit that pipeline like this. And I can go into the variables and then variable group and then link to variable group. And now I have my 3 secrets right here. See this magic? Now it's linked. Now the question is, how can I access these variables from that console app so I can create resource groups from the pipeline? How do I do that? It took me a little while to figure this one out. It's not exactly something you can find online, but here's what we can do. What we can do, and there could be better solutions out there, if you go to environment variables, let's create these things. Azure client ID. And I'm going to access that guy like this. Client ID. See this, let me actually hide the camera here for a sec. See this guy here on the side? I'm basically creating an environment variable, and that environment variable is reading straight from these secret group. Let's do this again. Azure client secret, and that would be client secret. And let's do that little $, and then Azure tenant ID. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and say tenant ID like this. So now I have access to these environment variables, and I'm going to show you now how our console app and even if you try to print these variables out, it will print it out like stars, which is beautiful. That's added security to it. It won't let you actually expose this or print this out, only to utilize it. Okay, so I'm going to save this guy. I'm just saving it. Now let's go back to our console application, and instead of saying, here's my console app. Instead of saying go ahead and pass these secret, I'm gonna go ahead in here and say environment. Watch this. Dot get variable. Get environment variable. And in here I'm gonna say Azure client ID. And the same thing happens with each and every one of those. Watch this. Azure client ID. And in here I want Azure client secret. And in here I'm gonna say Azure tenant ID. All right. So now I don't have any secrets in here. My secrets are being pulled through the pipeline and assigned to environment variables that are also secure. And I'm just reading these environment variables and moving on with my day. So just to make sure that we're actually doing the right thing, I'm going to change the resource group in here, the name of the resource group in here a little bit. So you know that this is the new change, right? So in here, let's go ahead and say provision code. So I'm pushing my provisioning code in here. So push all. Here's the code going up into Git and ADO. So this is gone. And now that I have those, now let's go ahead and queue and see if that works. Fingers crossed. I am looking at my resource groups in here. And I don't have anything in here that indicates this new Azure group that I was just talking about. By the end of this run, I should be able to create an Azure resource group in the cloud without me having to touch Azure dashboard. That's basically the goal. So that means a whole bunch of engineers can submit code, the code gets reviewed, and then after the code review, the deployment or the kickoff of the process is what's actually going to make this happen in the cloud. So let's see if that's really the case. Let's give it a shot there. Here we go. Restore moment of truth. So many moving parts. It's not really that simple, but hopefully I'll be able to simplify it even further. There we go, restoring and building. Let's take another look at our code. So look what it's doing. It's basically pulling these environment variables that I created, and I assign the secrets to them from that variable group. And then it's going to use that to actually create very secure, very beautiful. Let's just see if it works. So this guy says I'm done. Is it really done? Did it actually create the security group? We'll see. We'll have to refresh. Azure does this all the time. Do I have it? Do I have it? We didn't see any failures, which is good. And this guy is completed. Let's just make sure that our code actually... Yeah, we went and said create this resource group. Yep, that's all good. So we should be able to see a resource group in here. There it is. Do you see it? New Magic Azure Resources, straight from ADO to the cloud, and it's creating resources for you. That means you can create anything you want, right? That means we completed this part. This part is done. See how simple that was? It wasn't that simple to discover, but now it's very simple. We created C# code, put it into the ADO, attach ADO to Key Vault, and then Key Vault push it to Azure. Now, what's left? To actually turn this into something that people could use, you want to leverage the broker service exposer kind of pattern to allow people actually to use the system. So we can't just go and tell people, here is the system now that you can access a console application, go ahead and use it like that. We don't want to do that. We want to organize our world a little bit, because we need statuses. We need, to understand all the bits and pieces of the system. We need to make sure that your code is easily extensible and even testable if you want to test it. Although that I think testing your infrastructure code is a little bit of an overkill, But, you know, some people might go to that extent if the code is clean enough. So here's what I did. Let's go back to the blackboard. Let's go back to the theory. The theory is I want some brokers and I want some services, right? So I need few things. I need a cloud broker, and the cloud broker is basically something to abstract away the Azure SDK, far, far away from my logic, kind of logic, right? Your infrastructure logic. And I also want a logging broker. And this logging broker is what's going to tell me, okay, I created this resource group, I created this database, I created this, I created that, all of these little things. And then I also want, you know, on top of all of this, so you got the cloud, you got the logging broker. What else do we need to complete this little? Of course, I need a little bit of, I need a service. I'm going to use two services in here. One is a foundation service and one is a processing service. And this guy is going to use each and every one of those. The last one I want is a configuration broker, something that reads those environment variables for me and bring them down to me, right? Because that's very important. So the configuration broker. So each one of those has a responsibility. This guy will expose APIs that I can read to create Azure instances. So this guy will give me the capability to create a resource group, give me the capability to create a database, an app service, a queue, all the things that I need. And this guy will help me report what's happening in the process as I go, because it takes a while to provision a database and an app service and all that. So it's nice to see a log of how things have happened. And then this configuration broker will talk to a file. And this file will have which environments the team wants to create or destroy. So it's a little app settings in here, right? And this is here just a JSON file that has your configurations. What environments you want to create and what's the name of your project. Push this through source control. Don't let this come through variables, because that means anyone could just type it in there and create, you know, resources. It has to be source controlled, right? So all of this is source controlled, and then you want to have a provision service. And you also want to have a provision processing service. So what's the responsibility of this and what's the responsibility of that? This guy will combine all of these. Sorry, just these two mainly. Right? And it will go and say, go find the configurations, create an instance, and log status. This guy here will say iterate for each and every environment. And at the very end in here, that would be the executor, which is your exe. This is the exposer, which is your program CS. Like I told you before, it's not always a controller. It will never be a controller all the time. Sometimes it's a UI, sometimes it's a console application, sometimes it's anything. So if you structure your infrastructure code like that, that means that you are allowing everyone on your team to be able to contribute to creating new instances or destroying older instances or creating new environments. It's all source controlled, but at the same time it's intuitive. It's C#. It's a better engineering experience than creating these, you know, templates and, you know, doing YAML code and all of that stuff. We don't want to do any of that. We just want to do it in C#. So what does that look like in real life? Let me show you the execution first. Let's go to one project that I created here. So here's a demo project. Right? Let me execute first. Let me show you. If you want to see what it takes to make a demo like this, look at all these trials and errors. Lots and lots and lots of trials and errors. Okay, let's first go ahead and run the pipeline. I'm just going to run the pipeline. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to run the pipeline and show you what happens. These are my resource groups. Let's delete this one since we don't need it anymore. This pipeline that I'm running right now, it's going to create two environments. Dev and UAT, development and user acceptance. And not just that, on top of all of this, it's going to go and say, create app services, databases, and plans, everything related to an environment that you want to create. So pay attention to what's going to show up in here. This is going to be, what this pipeline is doing. Let's take a look at this pipeline. This is a full end-to-end production ready, code that can actually run everything. Talks to Key Vault. It reads, everything you need. It basically talks to Key Vault, and I'm going to show you the code in a second, but I want to show you what it actually does. So you see this command line in here? See what it's saying in here? Let's zoom in a little bit and hide the camera. Look at this. See, creating ZOOGII resources dev, ZOOGII resource diff created. See, all of this is configured. It's creating literally the entire environment for me. If I go and start refreshing this guy here, do you see ZOOGII for dev, and it's creating the plan? It's creating everything, literally everything for me in here. So let's go back to this guy. Let's just make sure it succeeds. So it created a resource group. It created a plan. It created an app service, which is an API. And now it's creating the database server. Let's make sure it makes the database server right. All of this is coming from Azure Key Vault. And it's coming back and it's processing it and creating these environments, very seamlessly, all in C#. And then I'm going to show you the code in a second. You're going to love the code a lot. The code should definitely match 100% what I just described to you right here. Right? So is every other project in the world, right? It should have brokers that talk to the outside world. So this cloud broker talks to Azure SDK. This guy will just talk to, it literally talks to console.writeLine, but it's an external resource. It's not something that we own, so it has to be pushed away, just like datetime. And then the configuration, which to read from a JSON file. Let's just see if this guy is done. See, some of these things take a while, like provisioning a database server and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes they may fail. This is why it's fail safe. Like if you run the script again, it's not going to blow up and tell you, oh, you already created this resource. Okay, it looks like it created a DB server. So if I go back here and refresh this guy, look, I have the API right here. And I have the plan, and the database server should show up really, there it is. And it's not just that, it's creating the dev environment. It's going to create two environments for me, and I'm going to show you how simple it is to be able to create the configuration, because everything is already in place. All you have to do is either to add an additional capability that you want to use, or you want to just add another environment. Just add another environment, just add another environment, and that's it. Obviously, this is very, very like new stuff. I understand people are going to have a lot of questions. I'm going to use this in my real work, real environments, just to see how far we can extend it and how much production ready it is, but it's definitely very, very promising. All right, so back to this guy. If I refresh here, this guy should be done. If I go out of here, it probably already started working on the UAT. See, it already started working on UAT. So it's spinning up all three environments for me. UAT, dev, just like that. Right, I don't think I included that in the configuration, the prod one, but it'll create two environments for me. So it's already in the database server. So if I go down here and I refresh this guy, it should show me UAT. Let's refresh this guy. Here's a refresh. Here's my UAT environment. See, I got ZOOGII, resource UAT, and inside UAT it's creating all the things for me. Beautiful, full automation for your provisioning work. Now that we talked about the automation, now that it's doing its job and it's finishing this, let's go ahead and take a look at the actual code. What does this code look like? And don't worry, I'm going to share this with you on GitHub. You're going to have everything you need, no worries. Let's just start from the top. So we have a cloud broker, an iCloud broker, and a cloud broker. And this cloud broker basically goes and reads all these environment variables, right? And we could definitely make this as part of a configuration. That's not a problem. It gets the client ID, client secret tenant, and then admin name and admin access. Admin name and admin access is basically what you set up your database for. Who is the admin and what's the password, what's the username, right? So that's not a big deal. And this is the code that we have to authenticate Azure. So all of this is encapsulated within the root file. And then see, every other partial class after that creates a plan. This one creates resources, with the input parameter it needs. Let me zoom out a little bit. And then you have storages. This one creates a SQL server and a SQL database. You have web apps. It creates an app service. This is your clouds broker. In your configuration broker, it's actually reading from your app settings. Your app settings is where you describe what project you want to provision and what environments you want to spin up. And then you determine each and every project. Like in this particular code, I'm making each and every project as a project that needs an app service and a web API, a database, and a plan. That's it. But if you want to add stuff on top of that, by all means, go to the broker and add whatever you want. So this is a configuration broker right here. And then there's the logging broker, and this logging broker basically calls console write line. Every time something happens, it just calls console write line. If you move up just by one into the services, provision service, you'll see all of these things that I offered through the broker are still there, but they're encapsulated with more things. Like if I open this guy here, it'll basically fix the formatting of the name. It will log that it started the creation process, and then it will kick off the creation process, and then it will log that it completed, and then it will return the actual instance. So that's this part here. This is the guy that takes each one of those and creates little, still primitive methods, but added a little bit of stuff on top of it. If you move up to this guy, the provision processing service, which is this guy, all what this guy does is that it goes and calls the configuration broker. It picks up every single environment and it creates for every single environment. See that separation of concern? One adds, it's one step until you reach the processing service where it goes and says, see how simple it is? Create a resource group, create a plan, create a web app, create a SQL server, create a database inside that SQL server, done. Cleanest thing you can get to. You would love to test something like that because it's so test driven. It's so easy to work with. It, performs interfaces, not much for dependency injection because it's just an infrastructure code. If you go at the exposer, the equivalent of a controller or a UI component, this is it. That's your guy. It goes and says initialize iProvision processing service and just provision. Provision what? Provision whatever in this app settings. You see what I'm saying? So if I go back to my pipeline here, here's my pipeline, and it's basically saying I provisioned everything. If I go to the cloud here, everything is in place. It has a database. It has everything in place. Both environments has been created within 2 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. You don't have anyone touching anything. Some people might come and say, well, I want to add particular settings into my app service. Absolutely. Everything is accounted for in this API. If you go into your API here for the clouds, if you go into web apps, in here into the implementation, everything is accounted for. Like if you go here, you can go and say, let's see, there is web app settings. You can set up the settings. You can set up just one value for the settings, like key and value, or you can set up, and again, the same pattern. If the values that you want to set up are secret values, then put it in Key Vault and pull it into Key Vault through your system. If it's not in Key Vault, if it's not a secret, then go ahead and define it in your configurations. It's all available. I'm gonna put this on GitHub. I'm gonna drop the link in the description. Sorry about the super long video. It's almost an hour, but that's pretty much it. It's a completely different mindset. You don't have to deal with ARM templates. You don't have to deal with any new technologies that you don't have to learn. It's all C#. It's all making sense. It's broken into components, applies strongly, religiously applies the principle of a separation of concern and single responsibility. And at the same time, the configuration is very simple and very easy. I will run through the entire process in a semi-production environments on the enterprise level. And I'm going to share my experiences with you. This is much easier. The first class citizen is your engineering experience. You are the target of doing stuff like this as an engineer, to be happy, to be able to write code and control. It doesn't matter whether you don't have to, do something crazy to get access to Azure so you can provision your own instances by hand or learn a crazy technology. All you have to do is just create a project like this in your solution and have your whole team set it up right, set up that pipeline like I showed you to run that console app, and the rest is history. You know, you just configurations, add new things, just making sure you're doing the right thing. It's source controlled. Your team is looking at the code that is going to execute and create instances. They don't have to worry about learning ARM templates. Anyone, literally anyone that knows anything about C# should be able to look at your code and know what it's doing. So I hope that was useful to you. And again, I apologize for the long video. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, please feel free to drop a comment in the comment section. I will put all the links and all the things that I've showed you today in the description. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.